November 28, 1943. 03 for 7 hours. Philippine Sea, 17 miles southwest of Krakatoa. The Japanese fleet, oiler Kenyo Maru, cuts through black water under a moonless sky. Her hull loaded with 10,000 tons of crude oil bound for the combined fleet's forward anchorage. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Nakamura scans the horizon through salt-streaked glass, seeing nothing but the faint phosphorescence of wave crests breaking against the bow. The convoy moves at 12 knots, zigzagging according to doctrine, escorted by 2 destroyers whose sonar pings echo through the depths every 90 seconds. Standard procedure, proven tactics. The Imperial Navy has sailed these waters for 2 years without serious challenge. Then the sea erupts. A column of water and flame tears through Kenyo Maru's starboard side amidships. The explosion so violent it lifts the 10,000-ton vessel 3 feet out of the water. Steel plates scream and buckle. Oil ignites instantly, turning the surface into a lake of fire. 45 seconds later, a second torpedo strikes the port quarter, breaking the oiler's spine. She settles by the stern, her propeller still turning uselessly in the air as men leap into burning water. The destroyer Umikaze races toward the stricken vessel, her sonar operator shouting coordinates, her depth charge crews hurling canisters into the deep. They explode in white geysers that shake the ocean floor, but there is nothing there. No submarine contact, no periscope wake, no diesel exhaust. The American boat has already slipped away at 17 knots, submerged to speed the Japanese believed impossible for any submarine in existence. Imperial Navy Technical Assessment, December 1943. By dawn, Kenyo Maru rests in 2,400 fathoms, her oil cargo never reaching the fleet. Her escorts never saw the enemy. They never had a chance. This was not an isolated incident. This was a pattern. Between December 7, 1941 and August 15, 1945, American submarines would sink 1,314 Japanese merchant vessels, totaling 5.3 million tons of shipping and 214 warships, including 1 battleship, 8 aircraft carriers, and 11 cruisers. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. They strangled an island empire that depended on ocean supply lines stretching 3,000 miles from the home islands to the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies, the rubber plantations of Malaya, the rice paddies of Indochina. Japan's war machine consumed 12 million barrels of oil annually. 88% had to cross water controlled on paper by the Imperial Navy, Japanese Ministry of Munitions, 1944. Yet by mid-1944, tanker losses exceeded new construction by a ratio of 3 to 1. Fuel stocks plummeted. Pilot training programs collapsed for lack of aviation gasoline. Warships sat idle in harbor because there was no oil to sortie. The Japanese High Command could not understand how this was happening. Their anti-submarine doctrine, inherited from the Royal Navy and refined during operations against Chinese and Soviet forces in the 1930s, emphasized convoy escorts, zigzag patterns, shallow water coastal routes, and aggressive depth charging of suspected contacts. Their destroyers carried Type 93 hydrophones, adequate for detecting diesel submarines at ranges up to 3,000 yards in calm seas. Their depth charges, set to detonate at 100 to 200 feet, were lethal within a 50-foot radius. Their naval air patrols flew thousands of sorties monthly. On paper, the system worked, but American submarines were sinking Japanese ships faster than Japan could build them, and the kill rate was accelerating. In 1942, U.S. boats averaged 1 confirmed sinking per patrol. By 1944, that number had tripled. U.S. Submarine Force Pacific Fleet War Diary, compiled 1945, Japanese merchants began refusing to sail. Insurance rates for remaining cargo vessels climbed to 60% of hull value. Convoys hugged coastlines, adding weeks to transit times, burning precious fuel to avoid deep-water routes where American submarines hunted with near impunity. What the Japanese did not fully grasp what their intelligence services failed to synthesize from scattered contact reports, survivor testimonies, and captured documents was that they were not fighting the submarines they expected. The American boats prowling the Pacific in late 1943 bore little resemblance to the cautious, doctrine-bound fleet submarines that had stumbled through the war's first 18 months, hamstrung by defective torpedoes, timid commanders, and obsolete tactics. Something had changed. Multiple somethings. A convergence of technical innovation, operational doctrine, industrial output, and sheer desperation had transformed the U.S. submarine force into a weapon system Japan's defenses were never designed to counter. The submarines themselves, Gato and Balo-class fleetboats, 311 feet long, displacing 1,525 tons surfaced, armed with 10 21-inch torpedo tubes and carrying 24 Mark 14 torpedoes, could dive to 400 feet, far deeper than Japanese depth charges were typically set. U.S. Navy Bureau of Ships. Technical Manual, 1943. Their diesel engines generated 5,400 horsepower, pushing them to 20 knots on the surface. Submerged, they made 9 knots, but they possessed something far more dangerous than speed: endurance. Range of 11,000 nautical miles, patrol durations of 75 days, air-conditioned compartments that kept crews alert in tropical heat, refrigeration units that stored fresh food for weeks, maintaining morale and health on extended war patrols. General Electric Contract Report. Navy Refrigeration Systems, 1942. But machinery alone does not win wars. The men operating these boats had learned hard lessons in blood and frustration, and by late 1943, they were applying those lessons with ruthless efficiency. The Japanese were about to discover exactly what those lessons were. Why no amount of courage, discipline, or tactical doctrine could compensate for the widening technological and operational chasm between hunter and prey, because the Americans had solved a problem the Japanese didn't even know existed. The problem had a name: the Mark 14 torpedo. For the first 18 months of the Pacific War, American submarine commanders fired thousands of torpedoes at Japanese targets and watched in helpless rage as warheads passed harmlessly beneath enemy hulls, detonated prematurely, struck targets squarely without exploding, or ran in wild circles threatening to sink the firing submarine. The Mark 14, designed in peacetime secrecy by the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance and never tested under realistic combat conditions due to Depression-era budget constraints, suffered from 3 catastrophic defects. It ran 11 feet deeper than set depth. Its magnetic influence exploder triggered prematurely in the Earth's magnetic field variations near the equator, and its contact exploder's firing pin crumpled on impact instead of detonating the warhead. U.S. Navy Bureau of Ordnance Technical Investigation, September 1943. Submarine skippers returned from patrols with 0 confirmed kills despite perfect attack setups. Morale cratered. Careers ended. Men died accomplishing nothing. The Japanese never knew how close they came to winning the underwater war by default. But in the summer of 1943, everything changed. Admiral Charles Lockwood, Commander Submarine Force, Pacific Fleet, bypassed Bureau of Ordnance bureaucracy and authorized field testing at the submarine base in Pearl Harbor. His weapons officer, Commander Lawson Red Ramage, conducted live-fire tests against submerged nets, proving the depth-running error. Submarine commanders in forward areas conducted unauthorized tests of their own, deactivating the magnetic exploder and discovering the contact exploder's fatal flaw. By September 1943, field modifications had corrected all 3 defects. The Mark 14 finally worked. Commander Submarine Force Pacific Fleet Report, October 1943. Suddenly, American torpedoes struck where aimed, at the depth intended, and exploded on contact with 643 pounds of Torpex high explosive, 50% more powerful than TNT. Japanese hulls that had survived glancing impacts now disintegrated. Sinking rates quadrupled almost immediately, but the torpedo fix was only the beginning. The Japanese assumed American submarines operated like their own, solitary hunters, rigidly following prescribed patrol sectors, communicating rarely, attacking cautiously to preserve the boat as the primary asset. They were wrong. By late 1943, U.S. submarines were operating in coordinated wolf packs of 3 to 4 boats, sharing target information in real time via high-frequency radio, vectoring onto convoys from multiple vectors, overwhelming escorts through simultaneous attacks. U.S. Submarine Operations Research Group Analysis, 1944. The Japanese had no doctrine for this. Their convoy escorts, designed to defend against single attackers, found themselves facing torpedo spreads from 3 directions at once. Unable to prosecute all contacts simultaneously, the coordination was enabled by technology Japan could not match. Every American fleet submarine carried a TDC data computer, 300-pound electromechanical analog computer built by Armour Corporation in Brooklyn that automatically calculated firing solutions based on target course, speed, range, and angle on the bow. Technical Manual TMS 930511, Torpedo Data Computer Mark III, 1943. The submarine's periscope fed bearing data directly into the TDC via synchro motors. The TDC continuously updated the firing solution, compensating for target maneuvers, torpedo characteristics, and submarine motion. When the solution reached optimal parameters, indicator lights flashed green. The torpedo officer pressed the firing key. 6 seconds later, a 3,000-pound Mark XIV left the tube at 46 knots, running true to the computed intercept point. The TDC reduced firing solution time from 5 minutes to 30 seconds and increased hit probability from 20% to 55%. U.S. Naval Ordnance Laboratory Study, 1944. Japanese submarines still calculated firing solutions manually using slide rules and visual estimation, a method unchanged since 1920. Then there was the radar. By 1943, every American submarine carried SJ surface search radar, operating at 3 cm wavelength with a range of 12 miles, against a large surface contact radiation laboratory MIT contract report. Naval Radar Systems, 1943. The Japanese had nothing equivalent. Their primitive radar operated at longer wavelengths, easily detected and jammed, with ranges under 5 miles. American boats could detect convoys over the horizon in total darkness, track multiple targets simultaneously, and attack from positions Japanese lookouts could never spot. Submarine commanders attacked at night on the surface, using superior speed, 20 knots, versus a convoy's tend to maneuver into firing position, launch torpedoes from darkness, and disappear before escorts could respond. Japanese captains reported phantom attackers materializing from nowhere, striking with uncanny precision, then vanishing like ghosts. Interrogation report. Captain Hiroshi Abe, September 1945. Dramatized composite. One Japanese destroyer, Captain, depth charging empty ocean for the 7th time in 3 months. Radioed in frustration. We are fighting spirits, not submarines. They see in darkness. They know our position before we know theirs. Our weapons reach where they are not. This is not war, it is slaughtered. Japanese naval operations record, February 1944. Dramatized composite. January 23, 1944. South China Sea, 40 miles west of Manila Bay. Commander Sam Delhi, skipper of USS Harda, receives an ultra-intelligence intercept, a Japanese convoy for cargo ships. 2 tankers, 3 destroyer escorts departing Manila at 1800 hours. Course 240 degrees, speed 11 knots, bound for Cam Bay, with aviation gasoline and munitions for the 14th Air Fleet. Harda is 180 miles south. Delhi pushes his diesels to flank speed, racing northwest through darkness to intercept. At 0220 hours, the SJ radar paints 6 contacts at 14,000 yards, bearing 0 for 2 degrees. Delhi closes to 8,000 yards, tracking on radar, invisible to Japanese lookouts, straining through binoculars into black night. At 0340, range 3,000 yards, Delhi fires a spread of 4 torpedoes at the lead tanker Hibiki Maru, a 10,000-ton fleet oiler. The TDC solution is perfect. Running time, 97 seconds. The crew counts down, silent except for the tick of the chronometer. At 95 seconds, a flash lights the horizon. The explosion's shockwave reaches Harda. 8 seconds later, a dull thud felt through steel decks. Hibiki Maru's bow section disintegrates. She settles in 4 minutes. The convoy scatters. Destroyers race toward the attack bearing, active sonar pinging frantically. Delhi dives to 350 feet and turns due south at full submerged speed. The first depth charge pattern detonates 400 yards astern, close enough to rattle dishes in the galley, far enough to cause no damage. Cork insulation falls from overhead pipes, light bulbs shatter. The depth charging continues for 20 minutes, marching away as hard as slips beneath a thermocline layer that refracts sonar pulses, harmlessly upward. U.S. Submarine Tactics Manual, revised 1943. By 0500, the Japanese have lost contact. Delhi surfaces at dawn, recharges batteries, and tracks the scattered convoy throughout the day via radar and periscope. Staying beyond visual range, at 2,100 hours, the convoy reforms, minus Hibiki Maru, now making only 9 knots, because the second tanker is damaged and leaking oil. Delhi attacks again on the surface at 2,245, firing 6 torpedoes at 2 cargo ships from 2,500 yards. For hit, Kenyo Maru explodes her cargo of aviation gasoline ignites. The fireball, visible from 30 miles and sinks in 90 seconds. Kenyo Maru takes 2 torpedoes amidships, breaks in half, and founders in 7 minutes. USS Harder War Patrol Report No. 5, February 1944. Total tonnage sunk, 23,000 tons. Torpedoes expended 10. Damage to Harder, 0. Delhi withdraws at flank speed before the stunned escorts can organize a response. The convoy, what remains of it, limps into Kamran Bay 3 days late, having lost half its cargo capacity and 217 merchant seamen. The 14th Air Fleet receives 40% of expected fuel. Planned bombing raids against Allied positions in New Guinea are cancelled. Fighter squadrons are grounded for 2 weeks. The ripple effects cascade through Japanese logistics networks already stretched to breaking. Japanese 14th Air Fleet Operations Log, January 1944. This single patrol demonstrated every advantage. American submarines now possessed reliable torpedoes that detonated on impact, radar that enabled night surface attacks with impunity, TDC fire control that guaranteed hits, speed and endurance to stalk convoys across hundreds of miles, and tactics refined through brutal experience. The Japanese had no counter. Their escorts, designed for daylight attacks by submerged submarines operating at slow speed, could not cope with fast surface attacks launched from beyond visual range in darkness. Their sonar could not penetrate. Their depth charges could not reach submarines diving below 400 feet. Their doctrine had not evolved, and the Americans were just getting started. By June 1944, the cumulative weight of American submarine operations had transformed from tactical harassment into strategic strangulation. Japan's merchant fleet, which stood at 6.4 million tons in December 1941, had been reduced to 2.8 million tons, and attrition continued accelerating. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. The War Against Japanese Transportation, 1946. Oil tankers, the lifeblood of empire, were disappearing at catastrophic rates. In the first 6 months of 1944 alone, American submarines sank 47 tankers, totaling 316,000 tons. Replacement construction managed only 8 new tankers. The ratio was unsustainable. By October 1944, oil imports to Japan had fallen to 200,000 barrels, monthly less than 1/6 of minimum requirements. Japanese Cabinet Planning Board Statistical Analysis, 1944. Refineries in Yokohama and Kawasaki operated at 30% capacity. Fuel allocations to the combined fleet were slashed by half, then halved again. Training flights for new pilots dropped from 300 hours to fewer than 100, producing aviators so poorly prepared they crashed on takeoff or flew into the ocean during routine maneuvers. The strategic calculus was brutal and simple. Japan fought a modern industrial war with an economy dependent on resources it could not protect in transit. Iron ore from Manchuria, coal from Kyushu, bauxite from the Philippines, rubber from Malaya, rice from Indochina. Every calorie, every gallon, every ton of steel traveled by sea through waters where American submarines waited with functioning torpedoes, advanced radar, and coordinated tactics. Japanese convoys began hugging coastlines, accepting 40% longer transit times and increased vulnerability to air attack rather than risk deep-water routes. Average convoy speed dropped from 12 knots to 8 as damaged escorts and underfueled merchants struggled to maintain formation. Ports became bottlenecks as ships waited. Weeks for escorts that never arrived or fuel allocations that never materialized. Imperial Navy Transport Command Report. July 1944. The psychological impact rippled through every level of Japanese operations. Merchant marine crews, aware that survival rates on convoy runs had fallen below 50%, deserted at unprecedented rates. By early 1945, the Maritime Transportation Bureau was press-ganging dockworkers and conscripting civilian fishermen to crew cargo vessels because trained seamen refused to sail. U.S. Naval Technical Mission to Japan Report. Interrogation number 447, October 1945. One captured merchant captain told American interrogators, "We called convoy duty the lottery of death. You departed with 12 ships and arrived if you arrived with 4. We never saw the submarines. We only saw ships exploding in darkness, and then the fire, and then the screaming. After 6 convoys, I no longer cared if I lived or died. I simply waited for the torpedo interrogation report." Captain Kenyo Maru, September 1945. Dramatized composite. Japanese naval commanders faced impossible choices: assign destroyers to convoy escort duty, and fleet striking power diminished; leave convoys unescorted, and the fuel and ammunition needed for fleet operations never arrived. The Imperial Navy opted for fleet preservation and watched its logistical foundation collapse. By the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, Japanese battleships and carriers sorted with fuel tanks less than 3/4 full because reserve stocks had been exhausted. Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force burned so much fuel maneuvering in the Sibian Sea that refueling became impossible. The fleet had to fight with whatever remained. Japanese Naval War College analysis. Battle of Leyte Gulf, 1945. After Leyte, major fleet operations ceased entirely, not because the ships were destroyed, though losses were severe, but because there was no fuel to sortie them. In December 1944, the super battleship Yamato sat anchored in Kure Harbor, with 800 tons of fuel aboard, immobilized because allocating more oil to move her was deemed wasteful when that oil could power defensive aircraft instead. The human cost of maintaining America's undersea blockade was neither small nor forgotten. 52 U.S. submarines, 16% of the boats that conducted war patrols, were lost with all hands, claiming the lives of 3,506 submariners. U.S. Submarine Force Casualty List, compiled 1946. The men who crewed these boats endured conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. 75-day patrols in steel tubes, 16 feet in diameter, breathing recycled air that smelled of diesel fumes and sweat, eating canned food after the fresh provisions ran out, sleeping in bunks stacked 3 high with inches of clearance, listening through steel holes as depth charges detonated close enough to shatter gauges and rupture seals. They fought in total silence during attacks, every man frozen at his station, while sonar pings echoed through the pressure hull like hammer strikes on an anvil. They knew that one leaking gasket, one faulty weld, one moment of bad luck meant drowning in darkness 400 feet down with no possibility of rescue. Yet they returned, patrol after patrol, because the engineers and technicians on the surface ensured they had the tools to survive and prevail. At Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California, at Portsmouth Navy Yard in New Hampshire, at Electric Boat Company in Grattan, Connecticut, workers operated around the clock producing submarines at rates that would have seemed impossible in 1941. 16 fleet boats launched in 1942, 26 in 1943, 32 in 1944. U.S. Maritime Commission Production Report, 1945. When submarines returned from patrol with battle damage, repair crews worked 72-hour shifts to restore them to operational status in days rather than weeks. When skippers reported equipment failures, engineers redesigned components and shipped improved versions to forward bases within a month. The SJ radar that transformed night operations was upgraded 4 times during the war, each iteration adding range, reliability, and resistance to jamming. MIT Radiation Laboratory Development Log, 1942 to 1945. The submarines that prowled Japanese waters in 1945 bore only superficial resemblance to those that sorted in 1942. Every system had been refined, improved, and perfected through iterative combat feedback that Japan's rigid, centralized procurement system could not match. The strategic bombing survey conducted after Japan's surrender confirmed what anecdotal reports had suggested. Submarine warfare, more than any other single factor, destroyed Japan's capacity to wage industrialized war. Tonnage losses exceeded 7 million when coastal and small craft sinkings were included. The survey estimated that without the submarine blockade, Japan could have sustained military operations through 1946. Despite air raids and naval surface engagements, U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Summary Report, Pacific War, 1946. Instead, by August 1945, Japan's economy had effectively collapsed. Oil reserves stood at 380,000 barrels, enough for 2 weeks of minimal operations. Aluminum production had ceased for lack of bauxite. Steel mills operated at 15% capacity. Food imports had stopped entirely. Civilian rations in Tokyo provided 1,200 calories daily, below subsistence level. The lessons learned beneath the Pacific's surface echoed through post-war naval doctrine and shaped Cold War strategy. The U.S. Navy's post-1945 submarine force abandoned surface operations entirely, transitioning to nuclear-powered boats designed for sustained submerged operations, the logical evolution of tactics proven effective against Japan-U.S. Naval War College Strategic Studies, 1947. The coordination techniques developed in Wolfpack operations informed network-centric warfare concepts that emerged in the 1990s. The integration of radar, computers, and reliable weapons demonstrated that technological superiority, properly applied, could compensate for numerical inferiority, a principle that shaped American military procurement for 70 years. The willingness to identify and correct catastrophic equipment failures through field testing rather than bureaucratic process became a case study taught at every service academy. In 1982, during the Falklands War, British submarines enforced a maritime exclusion zone around the islands, using tactics directly descended from Pacific War operations: long-range patrols, coordinated positioning, reliable torpedoes, and the credible threat of unseen attack. Argentine naval forces, including the carrier 25 de Mayo and the cruiser General Bet, were neutralized without ever engaging British surface ships. Royal Navy Submarine Service After-Action Report, 1982. The psychological impact mirrored 1944. Argentine vessels refused to leave port rather than face submarine attack. The last American submarine skipper from World War II, Rear Admiral Eugene Fluckey, who sank over 95,000 tons of Japanese shipping while commanding USS Barb, reflected in a 1991 interview, "We did not win because we were braver than the Japanese sailors. They were as brave as any men who ever went to sea. We won because we had torpedoes that worked, radar they didn't have, and an industrial system that learned from mistakes faster than theirs could." Courage matters, but in modern war, the side that adapts fastest holds the advantage that no amount of courage can overcome. Naval Institute Oral History Program, 1991. In the end, Japan's inability to defend against American submarines was not a failure of will, courage, or tactical competence. It was a failure to recognize that warfare had evolved beyond the paradigms of 1920. The side that integrated technology, revised doctrine based on battlefield feedback, empowered field commanders to solve problems locally, and maintained industrial flexibility to implement solutions at scale. That side controlled the ocean. And in a war where everything traveled by water, controlling the ocean meant controlling the outcome. The submarine campaign did not win the Pacific War alone, but without it, every other victory would have come later, at far greater cost, if it came at all. The Silent Service wrote the blueprint for modern sea denial, and the lessons written in cold Pacific darkness remain operational doctrine today. Adapt or die. Fix what fails. Trust your people, and never stop learning, because